समकालीन राजनीतिक सिद्धांत मुद्दे एवं चुनौतियां. Our chief speaker for today's program is Professor Ashok Acharya, Sir, Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. Now, I would like to request our technical team to present a bouquet on behalf of our all students and professors on screen.
Thank you. Thank you. It looks awesome.
Thank you, sir. Before we go further, I would like to request all the participants to maintain the decorum of the virtual program and to participate enthusiastically, as this lecture series will help not only the honors student but also the BA program students as well. This lecture series by chief speaker and our professors will be followed by question and answer sessions where you will get opportunity to ask questions and clear your doubts from today's lectures. आप इंग्लिश या हिंदी दोनों में ही सवाल रख सकते हैं. We will try to cover maximum questions. Before starting the lecture session, we would like to share some glimpses of the programs that our department organized virtually this year. As we all know, हमारा college बहुत सारे programs organize करवाता आया है, but this time because of Corona pandemic, it was not possible to organize the programs in the college. So our department successfully organized many programs virtually through online modes with the help of our faculty members and the students. I would like technical team to present the screen share. One such program which our department held was the celebration of 75th Foundation Day of United Nations, which was held on 24th October 2020 in two sessions. That was morning and evening session. Morning session was followed by the book discussion on India in United Nations, authored by Professor CSR Murthy, Professor Rumki Basu, Professor Uma Shankar, and Professor Yesi was also part of this session. Evening session was organized for the active engagement of the students. Different competitions were held. There were painting competition, live quiz competition, and a just a minute competition. Students participated very actively in these competitions. Here are some glimpses of UN Day program. The second program that our department organized was orientation program for the newly admitted first year students to introduce them to their new college life, their department and professors, and to introduce them to their new family. So that virtually ही सही students अपने college को अच्छे से जान सकें. And the third program that our department held was generic paper selection program. As we all know that generic paper is a part of honors course paper. So to clear the doubts of the first year student, all the generic paper teachers introduced their subjects to them, so students could not face the difficulty in selecting the generic paper. Every teacher introduced their own paper to the students so that they will get to know what generic elective paper they should opt. And the next program that our department organized was Freshers Welcome program that was organized by the seniors with the help of our HOD Shavita ma'am. Uh, many freshers were included in this program and they participated actively. This year, it was not possible to organize in the college, so we organized it virtually and many participated. They sang their folk songs. That was the best part of these freshers, that everyone speak up in their own language, so they promoted their mother tongue. We also gave virtual crown to the Miss Fresher and Mr. Fresher. These were the some recent programs that were held virtually by our department. Now, I would like to request Head of the Department, Ms. Shabita Singh, ma'am, to come on the screen.
Thank you, Subhadra. A very good morning to one and all. On behalf of my department and all the teachers, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Acharya. Uh, I'm thankful that he has accepted our invitation, has taken out time to deliver this lecture from his busy schedule. I also feel that it is a privilege for us that he is with us today when we are beginning series, Eminent Lecture Series for students. Uh, Also, I want to welcome all the colleagues from different departments and colleges who have joined us today. I am very thankful to all first year students who have been so enthusiastic and they have been uh, encouraging us in a way to uh, organize these events. So it is unusual to do it on virtual mode, but this is the inspiration from the student side that we are able to uh, organize these activities. So the inspiration to begin this new series is uh, our students, our new students. In this series, we actually want to engage the students who are not able to uh, physically visit the college and the library. Uh, through my interaction with students, had this impression that they are finding it difficult to connect with new system of education after school. Earlier, we used to tell all the freshers in the beginning itself that go to library, familiarize yourself with, where your books are, which are the shelves most important for you. But now it's not possible. Uh, जब स्टूडेंट से कहा जाता था कोई पर्टिकुलर बुक वो अपने लिए ढूंढना चाहते थे तो लाइब्रेरी में अपने आप को एक्सप्लोर करते थे एक पर्टिकुलर किताब को ढूंढने के लिए उन्हें और बहुत सारी किताबें मिलती थी जो इंटरेस्टिंग लगती थी और जब फाइनली उन्हें वो किताब मिलती थी वो लाइब्रेरी जाते थे जो उनकी रीडिंग थी तो फीलिंग हुआ करती थी admiring the book have found in pile of, and looking at the book from cover to cover and feeling that you belong to the book and book belongs to you. Uh, though it was free for a few days, it was issued for a student for a few days. Those few days used to be very, very important for a student. This connect has been missing.
Savita, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Sir has been logged out. And I think there is a limit that is set for this. I think around 300 odd students can only people can only join. So could you allow him the passage so that he can join in? For some
Yeah, yeah.
reason, he actually moved out.
Uh, ask him to rejoin. It is 500.
Yeah, just to add,
Yes.
No, because people cannot join in. There are I'm receiving messages in the WhatsApp that only 300 people can be accommodated. Students can be accommodated. So because of
many
this,
of my
sir,
Yes,
students.
Okay,
Savita.
sure, sure. I'll just
Yes, my students are messaging me that they are unable to join, Savita. So please
just a
check.
moment.
Thank you.
Let we will try to bring him back. Please, sir.
yeah, one has to leave and then he can be accommodated. And then perhaps maybe you can share it on the YouTube link if it is possible. Through that, I think others can join. Many are in waiting for
हाँ,
this.
आप सर को बोलिए ज्वाइन करने के लिए हमने यहाँ से किया है. He'll be able to.
Okay, I'll just speak.
In the meanwhile, I will request my colleagues if anyone of you screen the program on YouTube or make it live through Facebook. सर ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं. I have created for him.
प्रॉब्लम क्या है सविता, क्योंकि जैसे ही सर ज्वाइन करना चाहते हैं कुछ और लोग एंटर कर जाते हैं.
Okay,
That
okay.
is the problem.
I'm removing some of the students, so
Yeah, because then he will be able to add it up.
हाँ. I'm removing students till he joins. Sir, should I call him?
Yes, can you
Sir, you are
now?
here? Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. We are very sorry for the inconvenience. These technical programs have these limitations, and we always,
Right.
you know, yeah. So,
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's just goes to say that we have a good strength of students, and
okay.
yeah. So, did I miss something? Did I miss something? I think one of your students was giving a kind of a roundup of all the events that have taken place in the college so far, and
Okay.
okay. So, please carry on. Please carry on.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll begin again. After that, I started. Sanjeev sir, are you there?
Yeah, I am there, Savita. Yeah,
All
please
right,
go ahead.
all right, all right. So once again, very good morning to all of you. It's a privilege to have Professor Ashok Acharya sir with us today when we are starting Eminent Lecture Series, and he is the first speaker to begin this program. Could be the best one to begin, I would say. We always look forward to have interviews with you, sir. Uh, I also want to welcome all my colleagues who have joined from different departments. I am very grateful to the first year students who have kept me, working on these different issues, different programs for them. And they are the pure inspiration behind this particular program as well. So once again, very warm welcome to each one of you. The purpose behind this lecture series and this lecture is uh, I'm having this impression that students are missing the connect between their books and the course they are studying, because it is a completely different mode, very unusual one. They have been shifted to a new system, a new stage of their life, with able to understand it properly, without able to explore it properly. I thought if we cannot bring a physical library to the students, and we cannot take students to a physical library, uh, we can always try to innovate, right? To bring this particular uh, experience back in their life. So I thought we have a lecture delivered by an author whose book they have been studying in their course, and it is their essential reading. So they will be able to uh, connect, they will be able to find the connect between themselves and their books. So here, uh, the need for this lecture has arrived, and you all would agree with me that the speaker we have today, he is, equal to several libraries when he's with the authority on subject. It is more than reading 100 books. So I would call this lecture as beginning of this endeavor. And without taking much of your time, I would like to request my colleague Sanjeev to formally introduce the guest to the young students, though his academic excellence need no introduction. But for our young student, like him to be this formally. So over to Dr. Sanjeev. Now I hand it over to Dr. Sanjeev.
Thank you, Savita, for this opportunity. And I welcome Professor Ashok Acharya to Zakir Hussain Delhi College. To most of the audience present here, Professor Ashok Acharya needs no introduction, as many are familiar with him and his work and contribution. But it is important to speak about him to the young students who have recently joined the college in the first semester. On a personal note, I feel it is an honor and privilege to speak about the person who has been my guide and mentor in life. I have learned much through the deliberations, engagement, and opportunities that has come my way, being his student at the University of Delhi. Uh, Professor Ashok Acharya currently teaches, as we all know, at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi, and he is also a Global Justice Fellow at Yale University. He received his PhD from the University of Toronto. He taught at the Northeastern Hill University, Utkal University, and University of Toronto in Canada before he joined the Department of Political Science at the University of Delhi in 2001. His areas of research include comparative and contemporary political theory, ethics and politics. His writings and the philosophical ideas on the themes of multiculturalism, social justice, and affirmative action, global justice, and cosmopolitanism have produced new perspectives on this and have contributed significantly to the intellectual debates. His important works in this area includes a vast number of essays and books, such as the Citizenship in a Globalizing World, and the much acclaimed Political Theory and Introduction, which is co-edited with Professor Rajiv Bhargava. I believe it's a must-read book for all students and researchers who are interested in understanding the nuances of political theory and the complexities of social and political life. Professor Ashok Acharya is a recipient of many prestigious fellowships, which includes the Canadian Commonwealth Scholarship, the University of Toronto Open Scholarship. He has been a fellow at the Australian Social Science Academy at Canberra, University of Birmingham, and has held the Henry Hart uh, Rice Visiting Professorship at Yale University. He leads the interdisciplinary Nyaya program on global justice at the University of Delhi, which is in partnership with various global institutions and also receives funding from the British Council. He is the team leader of global justice in the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs at the University of Delhi. He has recently founded the Center for Ethics, Politics, and Global Affairs at the Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. Today, we are extremely privileged to have Sir Professor Ashok Acharya with us to share his critical insights and thoughts on the subject, contemporary political theory, issues, and challenges. Uh, Understanding a political theory is not very easy as it may sound. There are deep contestations on what constitutes the idea of the political and diverse theoretical framework uh, suggesting of how social and political order can be organized makes the discipline very intriguing as they often bring out the complementarity and the disagreements to the forefront. Essentially, political theory can be understood, explained as a normative project. And much of the discourse in contemporary political theory, beginning with John Rawls in 1970s, and to the present deliberations on citizenship, democracy, multiculturalism, justice, and host of ideas, highlights this very concern. In Professor Ashok Acharya, we have a rich reservoir of knowledge, and his expertise in this subject will be of great help to all to understand the aforementioned nuances of politics. Not taking much of your time, I now invite Professor Ashok Acharya to deliberate on the theme. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for such kind, generous words, and also to Savita for your very kind and generous words. In some ways, actually, I have the distinction of being honored and privileged by the invitation to address young students at Zakir Hussain College and other colleges, students across some of the Delhi University colleges. So it is indeed my honor and privilege to be here today to have this kind of an audience who wish to listen to political theory. When I joined Delhi University almost 20 years back, we didn't have a very active and a throbbing and a vibrant audience to listen to political theory. So things have changed, and I believe I have, played a little small role in it to that effect. But I have had illustrious colleagues who have drawn attention of students to serious matters within political theory. Uh, Sanjeev, if you may, so it's close to 12 now. Do I have 45 minutes, or should I go for 45 minutes, or it depends on what time
Yes, sir, please,
organization you
please. I
have.
think 45 minutes will be, I think, good enough time to speak, and then we can have
Just
some questions.
yes, if students have other classes and things to do, maybe they can, for instance, leave and all that. But I will speak for 45 minutes. Initially, I recall having asked Sanjeev to give me an hour to cover all this, all the different things that I thought I would cover a rubric of contemporary political theory, of all its multiple issues and the different challenges it faces today, the issues that are posed to political theory, and in turn how political theory responds to them, and the challenges that political theory faces in today's world. However, let me give you a little bit of a warning. I will cater mostly to the interests of students, and especially the first year students. So I will try to be somewhat rudimentary and somewhat foundational in my approach. And so I have, last evening I gave up on the idea of trying to delve into some of the outer zones of political theory and the kind of issues and challenges it faces today. Though we can take it up if there is a question on such issues during the Q&A session. So to so in the last 20 years, I think, Delhi University, I've seen more of Delhi University, and I've been very, very encouraged by the diversity of the students and the sheer diversity of the experiences and the questions that they've brought on the table, and that the ones that they have discussed with me. I have learned a lot from the students in almost the last 20 years. And I really mean it when I say that I've learned a lot from my students, because my students have taught me to think about some of these issues in a much clearer manner. But the but clarity is something that still eludes me in many ways, and in so many significant ways. I think that if I have to discuss what political theory is, and the more and more I read about it, I find myself disagreeing with many, many scholars. Probably it's my problem and my expectations being too high, and so on. And but one of the challenges that we have, especially in trying to understand political theory, is to apply a certain kind of an analytical bent of mind as a critical spirit. So an analytical bent of mind and a critical spirit both are required to understand the complexities of the political world that we inhabit. So the world that we inhabit is very complex, but it is also made richer by our thinking. So we think through politics in many ways. And in thinking through the actual facts that lie ahead of us, we engage with the activity of political theory. Now, in doing so, for instance, let me tell you this, that we are living in very interesting times. These are very challenging times for us, and not just for us here in India, but across the world. And not only because of the pandemic, because the pandemic has done one good thing to us. It has driven us indoors and has made us think about things that we never thought about. We took life for granted in many ways, and now we don't do that. So we are forced to think. And so we are grateful to the pandemic. And if at all we have been lucky to have survived its attack, or it's infecting our bodies. So if we have been lucky to that effect, then we have really utilized our time. But the times are also interesting because of other things, not just because of the pandemic. It's also because we are, some 5 years back, for instance, let me give an example. Well, most of the people in the world, all those who cared to know what was going around in the world, were very happy that we were in a time that democracy as an idea was appealing to more and more people, and that the wave of democratization was spreading. So more and more countries were trying to become democratic, and the existing democracies were trying to strengthen their democratic roots and so on. So there was a huge expectation from the 21st century, in the last decade of the 20th century, which is around when most of you would have been born. So there was and I guess most of you would be the millennial children in some ways. You were born in this particular century itself. And but in the last decade of the 20th century, there was a huge expectation that the 21st century will unleash new progressive forces in our lives, and we may not have the occasion to look back. And so the spread of democratization is something very natural, inevitable, that's going to happen in our lifetime, and at least 2/3 of the countries in the world will become democratic. However, there have been some very unsettling reports about the world we inhabit, and of late, and especially in one of the very powerful surveys in the world, that is the Varieties of Democracy Project, which brought out a report in 2020, and in which I also participated as one of the research team members. Uh, it was found out, and it is available on the website as well, that forget about the spread of democratization. What's happening in the world around us is that more and more, the stronger democracies are now beginning to look a little more autocratic, and that what we call the autocratizing tendency, giving rise to autocracy. The autocratizing tendency in democracy is increasing, and this is increasing not just in some marginal democratic societies and all that. This is happening in some of the richest liberal democracies in the world. And so, scholars have pointed out, and especially in this report, it's pointed out that the United States, United Kingdom, India, Brazil, and many other countries, you have a growing trend of autocratization beginning to appear in their liberal democracies. So we live in interesting times, because many of you, who are born in this particular century would not even blink twice before, asking more troubling questions. But for a generation like mine, for instance, or for your parents, for instance, it is, we would like to look back as to where we began our journey and where we have come, and in that difference of time, we find that these things matter greatly, and that we find in many ways that democracy is in danger. But it is not just about whether or not democracy is in danger. What is more significant for us is to understand that a true exchange of ideas, a very frank and true exchange of ideas, seems to be somewhat inhibited. Whether we talk about the social media, or whether we talk about, the different writings and all that. Very few people believe in writing about the truth, for instance, as to what's going on around them and how they perceive it. But many of them are also somewhat, threatened by what others might think as to what they are doing. So there is a little bit of a threat that's looming all around us, even when we express our views and all that. Now, certainly, this may not be one of the greatest moments in the democratic life of any nation state, but it is, as students of political science, it is definitely one of the worst moments for political theorists. And so that's why I say that, wake up to the challenge of trying to understand what political theory does and what it might do, but it is trying to react and respond to the political world that we inhabit. And the political world that we inhabit is not always that smooth, that simple. And so we have to understand its different complexities and so on. Now, political science as a discipline is seen as part of the social sciences, right? So social sciences, you have various subjects: economics, sociology, anthropology, political science being one of them. Sorry. And within that, there are here some sub-disciplines within political science. So political theory, excuse me. So political theory is one of the sub-disciplines, but in many ways, it has less to do with what political science otherwise does. So political science, like a social science, is engaged for much of it in empirical understandings. So trying to understand the world as it is, not in a different way. So let us first, empirical social sciences usually try to take stock of what's going on around us, what's happening in the world around us, And how do we make sense of that? Now, while trying to make sense, empirical social sciences usually have a certain kind of a framework, and call it is a scientific framework where we establish a relationship between cause and effect. So the one particular cause gives rise to another kind, a certain kind of an effect, and we try to systematize knowledge about these causal relationships. And that's why we think that, okay, so this is all empirical social science is all about. We are not interested so much even in trying to predict what might happen, because this was one of the one of the objectives scientific researchers had around 40-50 years back, that on the basis of our good understanding of human behavior, whether in the political world, social world, or economic world, we will be able to predict how humans might behave under certain conditions in the future. But that is not, so people have given up on that hope of trying to predict. So prediction is out, but the empirical inquiry of trying to establish causal relationships, let us say, for instance, is still in vogue in much of the social science disciplines, which is why, as students, you will find that political theory seems to be a little at odds with other subdisciplines within political science. Say, for instance, something like, except for instance, something like Western political thought or Indian political thought. Now they seem to be a little closer to political theory, and yet political theory stands apart from these things. So what is it that political theory does that other subdisciplines do not do? So political theory is not about just explaining as to what exists around us. Surely they want to explain as to what goes on around us, but they also are in the business of saying that it's not only explaining what is, but also we must be focused on what should be done or what should happen, what ought to be there. So there is a certain kind of a line that connects between what is to what ought to be or what should be. So it is not in a predictive role, but in a prescriptive mode. So political theory tries to prescribe a certain outcome of human life, or of the collective human life, so to say. So political theory is concerned with the collective human life, or rather the aggregated aspirations of the entire political community. All members of the political community have a stake in how they design their collective affairs in some ways. So there is a link between, so political theory is engaged at the first goal, let us understand, with not only understanding what is, but from there it tries to take another approach to what should be done or what ought to be done, and what is that ideal state of affairs that we must aspire to. So what is that ideal state of affairs that we must all aspire to? Now, there are, of course, there are n number of, those descriptions of those ideal life. I will not go into that at this point of time. But so if, and then so if there is a plurality of all those ideal descriptions, or of the descriptions of the ideal world, and the facts as it is about the world that we exist in are these, then how do we go from here to there? Maybe we shouldn't be rushing off too much in that direction, expecting that our understanding of the political world is perfect. Maybe at times the understanding of the political world we have is not perfect. And as you see in any kind of an image of a person, there is a certain ways in which our eyes look at a particular, look at a particular object, and then we see it is, and we know that light acts upon that particular object, and then we get a, and then we get a, our optical senses then perceive that particular image in a certain way, and we think that we have got a full understanding of what this is all about. However, as like any photographer, you would also know that the object, the way we see something is also dependent on something else, and that is, does this image also doesn't this image also produce a certain kind of a shadow? So there is a shadow to everything. So the completeness of the image is made up not just by what we see in terms of how light reflects on something and enters our vision, but also in terms of what lies behind, that there is a shadow. So both of these things together make up the complete image. So, just start thinking about it. So it is not just the light, but it's also a mixture of light and darkness. Both of these give us a complete picture. And this is not the all. We also have a, depending on what our needs are, we also have a better understanding of what we see from where we see and what is the distance. So at times, what is our focus of inquiry? And the focus of inquiry can at times be very microscopic or can be very telescopic. So we at times want to have a big picture, and then we want to see the world in in that sort of a picture, or we want to see a very a very microscopic observation of a particular person, for instance, or of a particular sort of behavior. And then, so as in so if we are engaging with optical lenses, then there is one way in which we use microscopes. There is another way in which we use telescopes. So we try to study the planetary system through telescopes and the big picture we see of the, little bit of the universe that is visible to the naked eye, even with the help of telescopic devices. But when we try to use the microscope, we go and try establish a micro understanding of a particular fact, of a particular presence of particular facts. And so depending on whether we are using a microscope or a telescope, we determine what is the object of our inquiry, what is our focus, what is object of our inquiry. So there can be, in essence, what I'm trying to say is that political theory does these kinds of micro analysis, and also can at times do a kind of a macro analysis, much like as you have in economics, for instance, between micro and macro aspects of understanding the certain kind of phenomena or facts as exist in the world around us. Now, when you subject something to a certain kind of a scrutiny, a very close scrutiny, you are also somewhere not only trying to understand, but you're trying to, you know, raise some questions about this. For instance, somebody, let us say a political leader, can come under our microscopic lenses. For instance, let us all imagine here that we are all political theorists. So a political leader can come under our microscopic lens, and then we can see, for instance, what are the kinds of dialogues, rhetorics, the debates, and the words that a particular leader chooses to use, for instance, in trying to mobilize people. How much of it is true? How much of it is false? So we try to subject that person or that leader under our scrutiny. And at times we would like to have a macro picture, a bigger picture of the kind of society we would like to live in. Now, these micro aspects can be related to also the macro aspects in some ways, and so we have, so political theorists at times are sometimes chided, they're criticized for being too utopian, thinking about, a world that doesn't really exist. But that is what the business of a political theorist is all about also, that, that they are not only trying to understand politics as it is, they're also trying to set, within our the range of our focus or our focal inquiry, different kinds of frameworks, and then allow ourselves to choose one of them, or maybe two of them, or maybe, kind of a hybrid mode of these different ideal types or these different utopian images, and then we say, oh, how does this picture look? So in some ways, it is not just the so political theory can be seen as a use of optical lenses, but there is no science to it. There is no science to it, that this is what follows from this kind of an observation. There is, political theory in some ways is an art, and in some ways it is also a certain kind of a craft, and so it is an art. And here, when we are using this, the art of political theory, we are also trying to expand our ways of understanding the world, and of interpreting the world, of trying to make ourselves as objective as possible in terms of interpreting the facts, but also from there on, what kind of reasoning and argument we use for building up that alternative vision of a society is something that we do all the time. So what's so then what is political theory? In some ways, are we doing it at all, in our everyday lives? So can you only do political theory if you have read political theory, or can you do political theory in any case? I would say that in my view, I think we are constantly doing political theory. Each one of us is doing political theory. And and what does that mean when I say that we are constantly doing political theory? Now, here I will take you to one of the ancient thinkers, Aristotle, who said that man is by nature a political animal. Now, what exactly he meant by the term that man is by nature, or if you ignore the gender part of the sentence, and you say that a human being is by nature a political animal, but trying to fit it into our 21st century standards, then but what does it mean to say that humans are by nature political animals? It basically, what Aristotle was trying to say was that he was trying to distinguish human beings from other living beings, and saying that they have a capacity to reason. So we use this, and we are reasoning all the time, we are thinking. And we also have access to a certain kind of a very comprehensive and a complex language system. So we speak, we deliberate, and all these things. So we reason, we think, and we speak, and we deliberate. So both of these things happen simultaneously. Now, what does one thing lead to the other? No, both of them are somewhere conjoined with each other. So we are thinking, we are reasoning, and we are speaking, and we are deliberating. So in that sense, we are all political animals. And even if some of us believe that, and many students of mine, when I ask them in the class that, do you love politics, or what is your idea about politics as such? And most of them come up with an abrupt answer: oh, I hate politics, but I somewhere love political science, but I hate politics. But in saying that you hate politics, my contention, my argument is that actually it's not true that you hate politics. You hate a certain brand of politics that you see around yourself, that you get frustrated by. You somewhere subscribe to an ideal understanding of the world. And because what you see falls far below the expectations of what you have in terms of how the world might otherwise be organized, then I think you must say. So when you say you hate politics, you are giving a judgment about politics as such, the way it exists, right? So you are already reasoning. So unless and until you reason, you cannot judge something, you cannot evaluate something. And so when you are reasoning, before that reasoning, also trying to understand the world, and then you're trying to interpret the world, and then you're trying to reason, and then you're trying to subscribe to a particular position as to where you stand. All these activities are all strung together, like, so they are all strung. So, and nobody can escape this. So if you take Aristotle seriously, that man is by nature a political animal, we are constantly deliberating, and deliberating is like also action, by the way. So if I speak something, I'm also acting in a certain way. If I hold my views, and if I at times many people express their views in the private, more in the private, but still it doesn't mean that they don't have the views. At times they don't want to express it in the public. at times, but on the dinner table with your family members, you discuss many, many things. But you also discuss many, many things with total complete strangers whom you meet in the trains and in the flights and all that. है पूरा उनके सामने आप दिल खोल के बैठ जाते हैं कि ये सारे मेरे views हैं about the world around me and all that. So total, have you experienced this or not? I have experienced this many times. When I used to come those days, तो वो flight तो was not within our reach, so we used to take the train. और ट्रेन में सफर के समय हम बहुत सारे दोस्त बनाते थे in our train journey, and we used to share a lot of things. So starting from Lata Mangeshkar to Indian cricket to Pakistan to politics and to parties and everything, वो 36 घंटे में हम 3600 topics को हम discuss कर लेते थे. Sorry. That is what I mean by the deliberative capacity of a human being. So for Aristotle, we as citizens are constantly deliberating. So citizens understood in the 21st century language, not in the Aristotelian language, because in the Aristotelian language, some people were excluded from that citizenship. So I'm trying to use a modern term of citizenship to say that we are constantly deliberating about what is good, what is bad, what is fair, what is unfair. And at times we might say something very silly. For instance, I think this is unfair, but it is good for the country. Now, a political theorist will not stop here to say that this is good for the country. No, so then we can ask you, okay, so what is your view about the country as such? Why do you say that this is unfair, but it is good for the country? Why this kind of an argument where there is a kind of a disjunction between this and that? So we need to have a very consistent argument, starting even from some of the basic assumptions while trying to build up to one of the better understanding, a bigger understanding of what political community is all about and all that. Anyway, so coming back to this whole question of deliberation, Aristotle taught us, centuries back, that we are constantly deliberating on matters political. And at times, much of what constitutes the political is shaped by the kind of deliberation or the discussion we have about things around us. In that case, actually, theory and practice are so closely connected. They are very, very closely connected. We at times try to make these kinds of distinctions, but believe me, they don't actually exist, or not, at least, even as a distinction, there is no hierarchical relationship where theory must always guide practice. It can happen to some political theorists or some political philosophers who were schooled in the traditional political theory, for instance, to believe that political theory is all about the application of certain principles to the world around us, and that's it, period. But no, I think if you have to understand political theory, especially in 21st century, what I would call contemporary political theory, we are engaged in trying to decipher that very intimate relation between theory and practice, and the ways in which theory actually helps us shape or understand certain practices in a much better way. So theory at times helps us understand what practices, without theory, we can't have an understanding of the practice. There is already something prefigured here in the mind. But the challenge for a political theorist is not just to use that theoretical model to understand the practice, but at a personal level to get rid of many of the bias, right? A particular kind of view, and subject some of those biases to a very introspective scrutiny. हमें उसको स्क्रूटिनी करना चाहिए कि हम क्यों ऐसा सोच रहे हैं about the facts. हम bias तो नहीं है, because it sometimes happens that even political theorists are individuals and they belong to certain groups and they belong to certain categories, and then at times they can have such biases. But do they subject themselves to that kind of a self scrutiny is a challenge. So one of the challenges here in doing political theory is to subject oneself, huh, in a very introspective manner. Do I have any such biases, or should I get rid of myself of all these biases and so on? So for instance, if I believe in freedom, why do I hesitate to say that I agree with all that freedom allows, but then I should stop short of prescribing something where people from two different religious communities cannot marry with each other? That I would say, oh, well, how can I do this? How can I believe in freedom and yet say that people do not have the freedom to marry whomsoever they like? And so these are the kinds of contradictions that we need to reflect upon. We need to reflect upon. And in order to paper over, in order to straighten out whatever wrinkles remain in our thinking, in our reasoning, in our arguments. So while we are reasoning, and that is a very important term. So while we are reasoning in a self-conscious manner and also trying to reason the world around us, right? So we gain a better understanding, a better understanding. And then when we are trying to deploy a certain kind of a principles in that kind of a reasoning and say that, well, a fair society is that which does not, let us say, place a huge burden on the poor, on the marginalized, and so on. So we should not be, putting a huge burden on those who are somewhat deprived, or maybe, who are not able-bodied in some ways, or who are, who do not have enough resources to lead a dignified life. And so if we say that this is one of the understandings we have about, let us say, an ideal society, then, we should also try to, connect it with some of our own core understandings and our beliefs and our commitments and so on. And in this whole process, from that micro to that macro level, there should be a certain consistency of reasoning, of a certain kind of an argument. So things should flow very smoothly backwards and forwards between such constructions of what we think about the world around us, and how we think that the world needs to be made better with our initiatives. So we are we are understanding the world, we are trying to interpret it, and then we are trying to reason with it. And then we come to a point where we have a judgment, but that judgment also is not enough, because we need to justify that judgment in a public forum, not in our private space. So we hold many judgments, but most of our judgments do not stand the scrutiny in the public sphere, right? जैसे एक example मैं देता हूँ कि many people in their private lives, our private morality and public morality are not in sync with each other. Private में हम कहते हैं कि ये मेरी इच्छा है कि मैं किस कास्ट और कम्युनिटी में शादी करूं, right? या फिर उसको, this is one thing. And then you go further and say that I only want to get married in this particular community or this particular caste. Now that is my private preference. क्या freedom preference नहीं देता है आपको? देता है. क्या आप इसको, इसी चीज को आप publicly defend कर सकते हैं? नहीं कर सकते, और आप करेंगे भी नहीं. ये argument नहीं देंगे. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that there is a kind of a disjoint between what you call your private morality and what is your public morality. Now, public morality at times, it is very difficult to figure out what the public morality in a particular society is. But out of a lot of reasoning, out of a lot of argument, out of a lot of engagement with some of these core principles that we believe in, we also come up with a constitution. And a constitution holds some of the values and beliefs that we think are part of the public morality, right? So unless and until we change the constitution, which we can, so a constitution holds Some of our principles, some of our most cherished public values are in the Constitution. That is why these days, we also talk about something like a constitutional morality and all that. I will not go into that aspect now, but I'm trying to give you an example of what a public morality is all about. So an example of a public morality is what the Constitution envisions and what are the kinds of values it has for all of us, right? So here is this disjunction between private and public morality. And again, it is a job of a political theorist to see that there has to be a kind of a natural, a very effortless correspondence between the private aspects of our beliefs and our public values. And wherever they are not in sync with each other, we try to revise our judgments. So we correct ourselves and we say that, no, maybe I was wrong. And most of us were wrong. Most of us actually grew up with many of these biases. Let us accept it, right? But we don't carry on with these biases for the rest of our lives, right? We keep changing, we keep revising our views. And we are not always reasoning in a rational sense. We are also trying to be reasonable, right? Being rational is one thing, being reasonable is another. तो जहाँ पे हम सोचते हैं और देखते हैं, or we figure out in the world around us that many people can have many kinds of views about what is good for their lives. We try to be reasonable in trying to accommodate their particular views, right? So in any political community, so political community is a wider term I'm using. I'm not using the term like nation state or a village society and all that. I'm using political community in a very wider sense. And it can also encompass the whole globe, by the way. So in some ways, we are also part of the global political community. So in any political community, there will be a diversity of views. Right? Some people like, the radicals like Marx and others will say that this diversity of views exists because of the conflict that exists in the interests of different classes. Now, to a certain extent, this is right. However, there can also be a diversity of views because, if you take the time factor into consideration, so some of the views that were, that were expressed, that is 20 years back, are very different from what they are today. And then they will be very different in, what 20 years later. That is why you pick up any book that was published in political theory in 1960s or 1970s, hardly any of them discuss environment, for instance, or environmental politics or environmental justice, for instance. But you pick up any book today, go to the library and see for yourself. Go to the library and see, compare some of the older editions of some of those classics and bring them and compare them with some of the recent new editions that you see today. And you will see that there is a huge difference. So when you're trying to discuss justice, for instance, environment was no longer, was no longer discussed then. But now, when we're talking about justice as the, some kind of a sharing of benefits and burdens, then we are apt to ask ourselves, what are the benefits that some nations get vis-a-vis some others? What are the burdens that some must carry and some others should not? Isn't it a question, and we raise this question, that those who pollute the earth more must pay for that pollution more. So they should carry a disproportionate amount of burdens for having disproportionately polluting the planet. Right? So these are some of the new issues that have come up. In many ways, I think, and I'm trying to, cover a lot of ground, and sorry, but you can, if you think I haven't been able to discuss something a little more clearly, then you can come back in your question hour session and you can raise some of these questions, as to why, if you want me to make a better sense of what I was just trying to explain or discuss. So what I was trying to say is that in any political community, there are diverse views, and we all engage in some certain acts of reasoning and judging and evaluating. But we are also wish to be reasonable in accommodating each other's views, and that is what reasonableness is. Because without being reasonable, you can, you can always say, "अरे मैं किसी से कोई बहस नहीं करना चाहता. It is my way or the highway. Take your, So I don't think we can do that. So we will have to respect the diversity of views that surround us. So democracy is not about of consensus. कि बस यही होगा, right? This is all that I have to believe in, or the entire population has to believe in. So democracy doesn't ever, and any political community, for instance, will never say that, ek disha, ek gati, ek tarah ka pragati, everybody has to follow, right? So because people can have different views, and this is something that we need to think about. So when we have these kinds of different visions, we have to accommodate each other's views. And we can't always go back in time to then redefine the making of the political community. So, yeah, sorry, I had to just take a break for a second. Um, so, so when we are looking at this diversity of views, we are also looking at the competing principles or the plurality of principles that exist around us. And it is not always easy, to pick and choose how we wish to. So there has been a lot of debate within political theory as to what are the principles that we must all subscribe to. Believe me, there is no one way of saying that this is the principle, let us say the utilitarian principle. Why do you want to do this? Because it is the greatest good of the greatest number. अरे लेकिन greatest good of the greatest number में, when we subscribe to the greatest number, there is a little bit of those individuals or that minority that slips out of the focus completely. So South Korea can go on a growth model of development, saying that, the high growths matter, and it is the greatest good of the greatest number. For 75% of the population, the average income is very, very high. Or in the last 10 years, we have gone to that high. And then somebody will come along and say, but you have done nothing about that, the good of the numbers that are not part of the greatest number. What about them? So when you're talking about them and we have missed out on them, and we have consigned them or condemned them to perpetual poverty forever, up, we are not bothered about you because the majority of the society is doing so well, then I think we are probably on the brink of doing grave injustice to such people, right? And which is why somebody like Rawls, whom you will read whenever you take up these books, speaks about how we need to keep in our views the interests of the least advantaged. So how should we keep in mind, and we should never lose focus of that. And how, for instance, somebody like Marx would speak about, how do we take care of inequalities in society. So these are very rival conceptions to what we think is a growth model of a society. So some people get blinded by these things. So there is, in other words, you might be thinking कि अरे कोई consistency नहीं है तो हम क्या कर रहे हैं political theory में. As in democracy, so in political theory, the more views and perspectives we have make either our political community or our intellectual community or the very act of doing political theory much richer thereby. That is, the more number of views there are, the richer we are. Why should we always believe in a consensus? Democracy is not about a consensus. It is about dissensus. It is about a permanent disagreement. And that's a good thing. Why do we need to, make everybody agree to one point of view? That is very bad for democracy. And also, in our engagement with political theory, I don't think we should ever say that there should be one principle, the utilitarian principle. What about the I don't want to take a name that will, that will somewhere discourage you from reading. But let us say, just एक word मैं use करना चाहता हूँ, deontological, or what is about the deontological one. You will get to understand these things, and you can go and brush up on some of the readings. You can do some readings on your own as well, and some of your teachers will also help explain some of these things later on. So there can be two different ways, and so there is no one fixed understanding of how we conceive the world around us. For instance, I will give you another example that I like giving to my class, and that is, imagine one of you has cracked the IAS and you have become a district magistrate, and you are facing is a riotous situation where members of one community are coming to attack another community. Not one is passive and the other is only active. Probably there is an activity on both the sides, and you see a clash is going to happen. Now, you have to give an order which the superintendent or the commissioner of police will just follow. So what order you give? Should definitely you have the duty and the obligation to stop this violence and to not let people die. But you give an order for shoot at sight with the reasoning कि चलो एक को गोली लग गया तो बाकी सब भाग जाएंगे. What is the principle you are using? You are using a utilitarian principle that maybe one or two lives lost will result in some kind of stability. So there will be no further violence and all that, and people will run away from here. But what if that one bullet hits somebody innocent, or maybe a child or a woman who's nothing to do with rights? And even if they had, why should their blood be spilled in order to stop the spilling of more blood? That is a question that your friend who is a journalist might ask you. So a journalist friend comes up and says that, but how can you explain that why an innocent person was killed after all? हालांकि ऐसे journalists बहुत कम हैं आजकल, who go to those kinds of scenes and raise these kinds of difficult questions. That's a very rare breed now altogether, rare species. So some of you who want to become journalists, try to be as fearless as possible in trying to raise these kinds of questions in your public life. Believe me, you will do a huge service and contribution to our society by raising some such issues in a fearless manner. So do it if you want to join this particular profession. So these are the two different principles that both are invoking. The district magistrate believes in one principle, and the journalist believes in another principle. The journalist will say, "ये तो आपका, human rights violation हुआ और हुआ, सच है." And then the district magistrate will, and some other people will try to come and bribe the journalist. यार ये सब मत फैलाओ ज़्यादा, और भी बढ़ जाएगा. Stop. And then we are into another mode. So we have engaged with a utilitarian principle. Then we want to muzzle the voices of others because we want our principle to become successful. And so here are, this is an everyday example that I'm talking about. But what I'm trying to also say along with the everydayness of this example is that there are different principles in conflict, and there is no one clear-cut understanding, right? At times, so much of our social sciences and especially our economics, जो हम, बहुत students मैं जानता हूँ जो public policy पढ़ना बहुत चाहते हैं. क्यों? ना कल को मैं policy expert बन जाऊंगा. लेकिन वही, but have you ever reasoned what policy studies are all made up of? Much of that policy studies, and coming as it does from a certain kind of an economic training, is built upon a very faulty premise of always trying to do things, of reasoning with what a CBA approach or a cost benefit analysis approach. That there is a So we have to look at kya cost hua, kya benefit hua. Again, the same utilitarian principle smuggled in through a modern means, and then try to apply it to social sciences in their urge to become more policy oriented. So let me tell you, 20 years back when I joined Delhi University, I used to meet many students who wanted to become journalists, but they also wanted to become civil servants and all that, or they wanted to work with the NGOs. These days, I meet more students who want to be interns in policy think tanks, or want to work as become a policy expert, or want to work for the एकदम सीधा United Nations. सीधा वहीं पे पहुंच जाते हैं, that they want to work for the United Nations and all that. And you want a quick success, in trying to reach those places. This happens. I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. What's happening is that our focus has changed somewhat. We are somewhere, and that is one of the, I'm just digressing for a moment, but I will tell you something that I've always wanted to share with my students is the problem in our country, especially, is the best of the minds are always in a managerial mode. Either they want to become an IAS, or they want to become, a corporate executive, and so on. And that is why, or they want to become, policy expert and all that. So anyway, so even within policy studies, there is a room for political theorists, and it is only political theory who can raise some of these very deep, profound questions and put under interrogation an approach that we call a cost benefit analysis, and then say, well, utilitarian principle is just one principle amongst many. And so there are a plurality of principles. And when we look at all these principles, and given our own understanding of what the world is like, we know that some of those principles may also conflict. But those principles ride on the backs of some conceptual categories also, right? So there is a liberal understanding of what freedom is. There is a socialist understanding of what freedom is. There is, we might call it a communitarian conception of what freedom is. There can be a feminist understanding of what freedom is and what it implies. And so these are different conceptions about either the same principle or of the different, either the concept, but across different principles applied. So even when we are doing, so जब भी हम सोचते हैं, पूछते हैं students को कि what do you understand political theory, आपके दिमाग में वो आता है क्या, वो that framework जहाँ पे सारे concepts लिखे रहते हैं, immediately you imagine liberty, justice, rights, this and that, and then you say that, okay, here are a set of concepts, and they immediately come to my mind whenever we discuss political theory. These are all concepts. Yes, true. But there is a certain way in which there is a structural property to some of these concepts. So for instance, the structural property of the concept of justice is giving someone his or her due, right? Giving someone his or her due. But when you try to detach each one of them, who gives to whom, why, then you can conjoin again back the same things with different kinds of responses. So even if we believe that justice has the structural property of saying to give his or her due, there can be different conceptions as to what giving someone's due means like. So a liberal would say that after production has taken place, we can try cater to the needs of everyone, and so our distribution of justice begins after the production process is complete. And a Marxist conception will say that the problem lies in the production process itself. And so we must revisit that particular phase to see how there is an exploitation of labor. And unless and until we factor in the production process itself, any talk about distribution is meaningless. And then a feminist will say, you are all talking about things outside. Come home, I will tell you what production is, what distribution is, and how unequal that may or may not be. So then, a feminist will say that it is not just the public sphere, but let us bring in private sphere also. So these can be then different conceptions, and they're bound to be different. So like the different principles that exist in a plural form, so also there can be of each concept that are applied for each of those principles, there can also be different conceptions. And some of those conceptions also don't remain static. As I said, in the example of the environment, some of these concepts and their conceptions, basically their conceptions, change over a period of time. And so as our politics changes, so do our theories. And then we again re-engage with the practice in a different way. And we want to see, and especially if we find, so political theorists want to train themselves in such a way that they want to have a critical understanding of what's going on and then get into the prescriptive mode. So unless and until they understand the full face of the reality, they would never prescribe. And if somebody is doing it in a half-hearted manner, right, not in a full manner, somebody is trying to conceal facts and then trying to say that, don't you think this is what it is? And so we would find fault with that kind of a picture that any political theorist. So at times, and then ask that political theorist through our own critique that maybe your understanding is very faulty, right? So and that you need to give the complete picture before you arrive, at these kinds of conclusions. So it is an open critical activity. It's a perennial interrogation, a ceaseless reasoning, right? A ceaseless amount of arguments based on some of our judgments that are themselves subject to revisions in future. So I can have judgments about certain things today, but I should keep my mind open for revising my judgments 5 years from now. And it is not about being just judgmental about people. Most mature people don't be judgmental about people, others. So also about things. But am I trying to subscribe to the view that you can have any kind of a judgment? No, I'm not saying that. Something that you can rationally defend and justify. So you can have a judgment, whatever you like, but you must be able to justify. And in trying to justify, you have to give reasons as to why you believe in that particular judgment in the public domain, openly, before everyone. And that is what, that is where the real test of political theory is all about, which is why people think that giving justifications is one of the best things that political theory does. Anyway, I'm shooting off my time here. Now, I just wanted to say something, maybe a couple of minutes, just 2-3 minutes, and then I will end this. And that is, as I'd say, given an example of how there can be different understandings of what a political community can be. It can be very local and it can be global. Increasingly, political theory has been seen to be very Western and West inspired in many ways. And so there is a lot of people, especially belonging to the global South, and those who have been at the receiving end, or what you might call non-Western, though I hate that term, what is called non-Western, as if always matters and everything else is the non-Western. But even, so but there are people who haven't had much of a say in how our political theories need to be shaped. And that has started changing, but changing in two different ways. One is we are also doing a certain kind of a very rational, comparative studies between what exists here and what exists in other places, knowing fully well that some of these ideas have traveled across the world. Freedom is something that everybody wants, right? Whether you live in Japan, in India, Africa, or US, or anywhere, or in Latin America. So some of these ideas have also traveled. So then they have become hybridized over of time. And so there is a sense in which, even if we try to compare different traditions of political inquiry, right? We should not lose sight of the fact that there, ye nahi ki, ye to sara Western hai, hamara bas Gandhi theek hai. No, even Gandhi himself was, was influenced by others, was, himself is the best, model of the best hybrid model that that you can think of. Because if you recall, Gandhi said, standing inside the room, that I want to open all my windows, and yet do not want to be swept off from where I am. But the very act of opening up our windows is something I think is the most powerful message that Gandhi has given to us. Don't close your windows. Don't close your windows. Even if we call Gandhi a traditionalist, but the very fact that he said that let's keep our doors open, our windows open, means that there is a kind of a cosmopolitan character in Gandhi also. The most ardent of our nationalists also had a cosmopolitan character, which he didn't forget, but we seem to have been forgetting. So, even when we're trying to do this kind of a comparative assessment of who does what kind of political theory across the world, we must also keep in sight and keep in mind how ideas have traveled across the world. They have been domesticated by different cultures and contexts in different ways, and we should not lose that. On the other hand, there is a parallel movement of trying to make political theory more and more global. Why? Because we have come to realize, and especially in the present century, that many of our problems are global in scope and they cannot be solved by our nation states. So we are now engaged with some of the global issues like climate change, migration, global health, terrorism, and also illicit financial flows of money across the world, either because of corruption or because of the illicit practices of the multinational corporations. Now, all these are global issues. And we need some more institutions to come up in order to stem these kinds of ills that exist. And these are global issues that requires a kind of a global compass, a global political theory. So more and more people are now talking about a global political theory. One reason being that there are more challenges that have come to face contemporary political theory, which do not have their origins within particular nation states, but across the world. And then there are different ways in which people have understood, have reasoned with some of the conceptions or some of these values that they hold dear to themselves, chiefly through the spread of the idea and practice of democracy itself. So the democracy itself has taught us some of these values much more deeply. So we do not say, oh, that may be an American way of life. I don't believe in that. Our life is different. वो वहाँ पे तो बहुत individualistic है, हमारा communitarian है, we have to gel together as a community. No, once you have democracies, you cannot let go of the interests of the individuals. Every view counts equally, and along with that equal voice of every view, equal voice comes an equal vote as well. So every vote also counts. So if votes can be counted individually, in what ways are we not individualistic? I'm not saying that we are completely individualistic to the sense that it doesn't exist anywhere. These are very, very bad comparisons that we try and make. So in these ways, these are some of the new challenges to political theory, and they are all they fall under the category of what we call global political theory, and which is where we have to take into account that voices from the rest of the world beyond the West have not been taken seriously, A, and B, many of these issues have also become so important that we now need to speak about so many things. So we have to engage with theory construction as well as in trying to apply some of those principles, the ones that we accept, to the world that we inhabit, with so much of inequalities, with so much of unfairness, and with so much of oppression and so on. So the challenges are huge, and I've tried to cover a lot of ground, but I'll be happy to take up any kind of question that you may have. So I'm sorry that I exceeded my time limit by a couple of minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I hope it is fine. For those who wish to, so I see on my chat box there are around 44 unread chats. So I will leave it to the organizer to then tell me how should we go about the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to call Mrs. Vasudha ma'am and Shabana ma'am for the question and session with the students.
Thank you, Professor Acharya. Thanks a lot for your enlightening and enriching talk. Our students have shown a lot of interest in your lecture, which is evident from the flood of questions in the chat box. I have categorized the questions broadly into political theory. Then there are some general open-ended questions, and then there are specific ones related to farmers' protests and some empirical issues. So I'm going to start with, if you just allow me a minute. I'm going to start with, a bunch of questions, club them, and maybe you can choose to answer them selectively or right. So we have questions from Manasvi, Vivo, Neha, Vanishka, and Divesh. So they talk about political theory related questions. Manasvi asks, how can we form our own opinions? I often observe that we get swayed away by others' and from time to time, similar, I guess, is asked by layman term. We prefer asking what is politics. It's mainly been referred as dirty politics. Is politics just about dirty? One, what is your view? How can we form our opinion? Then another question on similar lines is by Neha. How should we start thinking politically and scrutinize the things around us? Then there is a question by Vanishka, and she asks, can we say that all political theories, be it equality or liberty or any other, I think she means concepts, are myths to some extent? And in this category, one last question is by Divesh, who asks, what role does dissent has in expressing democratic rights? And what space does right to dissent has in contemporary political theory? So these are a bunch of questions from the first category of questions, and then we can move on to the other after you've answered them, sir.
Thank you, Vasudha, for making my task
Over
a little
to
easier.
Acharya. Thank
Uh, so if I have to answer some of this, these are some very significant ones. But I must also tell you all that maybe why maybe I'm sure that most of your teachers will be able to answer these questions. So I'm happy to share my views about these. The first question was about what is it that do our opinions matter? Do they count in the world around us? How do we even form them and all that? Uh, Let me share with you something, and that is not, and here, as a political theorist, we like to make a distinction, although opinions are the most modern ways in which we try to relate to our views. But then in traditional thinking, the people used to make a distinction between what they call opinions and the truth. So if you read Plato, for instance, you will know that Socrates is basically wrestling with others' opinions or the different kinds of doxa. Doxa was a Greek word for opinion. So people can have different opinions and do come flocking to Socrates, and Socrates reasons with each one of them. individually, and then tries to displace those different opinions, and then say, how does Socrates begin this whole thing? He says, I know nothing. So tell me, oh yes, you have a wonderful view. Let me take it on. And then he will take it on, and then he will argue in a very simple manner, and then he will teach the person basically the art of argument itself, but raising some very substantive questions about the opinion held. Now, in Plato's political philosophy, for instance, there was this huge distinction between what is called doxa and what counts as knowledge. And then true knowledge is something that only some can have, and Plato will somewhere believe this. And we, as modern democratic citizens, we don't want to believe in what Plato had to say for the other part of it. But the truth is that that opinions are a bunch of things, and most of the people who believe in that Socratic or the Platonic political philosophy as the highest thing that political philosophy has ever done would ridicule most of the modern democratic citizens for giving only opinions. And so, for a Platonist, for instance, much of all the arguments that take place in the social media can be dismissed off as mere opinions. Okay, so you all hold on to your opinions, but as I said, opinions are subject to some of the questioning for, let us say, they may have some implicit or explicit bias to itself, or they may not have been rationally and reasonably constructed, by taking others into account as full legitimate members of the political community. So these are things, but even if we take the more expansive understanding of opinion as being a perspective, somebody's perspective, now they are very carefully, constructed over a period of time. We do not have we do not immediately gain a perspective on things. We first must need to know things. And so one of the challenges for any political theorist or for any social scientist is to, is at times to get to know things and then have a perspective, an informed perspective, rather than just a perspective and then say, oh, I believe in this. Why? I don't think, like, I didn't need to give any reason. As it used to happen in our generation mostly, not in your generation, the current students. In our generation, there used to be some of the oldies in our households who always thought, oh, the British Raj बहुत अच्छा था, और इंडिया में तो military rule होना चाहिए. Those kind of people still exist among us. कि इंडिया में मिलिट्री रूल होना चाहिए. क्यों? कि कोई सुनता ही नहीं है. That we have to clean up our streets. तो नहीं कर रहे हैं लोग, कुछ कूड़ा फेंक रहे हैं सड़कों पर, तो इसका मतलब है मिलिट्री रूल हो जाना चाहिए. But that is an opinion, a very, what to say, anyway. So, but if you want to convert opinions into a certain kind of an informed understanding and a judgment, then that is possible. It requires a little bit of reflection. So political theory is not about just expressing your opinion, whatever it is, but of having an informed perspective after understanding the facts and then trying to relate yourself to a range of views, subscribing to one of them, and then justifying why you subscribe to one view over the rest, or how you want to, so we are constantly, reflecting between the theory and the practices. And so they are not even in a hierarchical relationship, they are in a horizontal relations. So we try to reflect between the theory and the practice constantly and across over a period of time also. At times our theories are inadequate to grasp the full nature of practice, and at times, our practices, are far short of what our principles and theories are. And at times we have such opinion when, for instance, we raise this question that the principle of non-discrimination was has been significant for more than a century. But what explains the existing practices of discrimination that we still have in a society? So in that sense, we are actually saying that some of those theoretical principles have really been very bright and, have led us to think and to, argue and judge in very rich ways. But the practice falls short in many ways. So many empirical social scientists, for instance, believe that the practice must lead the way to what truth is, or to explain or to interpret the truth. And that theory is a second guide of practice. But that is not the case. In some cases, actually, some principles, some theories can be very illuminating, and they keep illuminating some of the unfair practices that we have been indulging in for a long period of time. So yeah, if I have answered this question on opinions, and then how do we, you know, well, dirty politics depends on how you describe a certain kind of a politics. Again, your political theory and political science will teach you that there is a little bit of that, dirtiness that whatever you do, completely part of the vocation of politicians themselves. For instance, Machiavelli taught you a few things about how must leaders behave, what must the leaders do that is different from, and they should conceive the world, the political world, a lot differently than how the citizens, think. So for Machiavelli, justice comes out of a certain sense of a necessity. So there is a necessity to strengthen the political order, and everything is justified in terms of building yourself on that, strategizing on the basis of this kind of a necessity or that kind of a necessity. So again, you will see that for someone like Machiavelli or someone like others, and there has been a kind of a Machiavellian tradition that has come down to us, is then is said to be the problem of what you call the dirty hands. The dirty hands. So the politicians' hands are always soaked in dirt and blood and all that, and that they can't escape the fact that their hands will be dirty. If you think that that is part of the politics that makes it dirty, then you will have to give a little bit of that value to the politicians, because indeed some of their work can indeed be dirty, but it all depends on what intentions they have. But many at times try to hide behind those, this particular, excuse, saying that, oh, no, we always had those good intentions, but what to do? We just got, a little corrupt. But it is not the corruption of that sort of a thing. I'm here talking about the moral corruption, of leaders not having very sensible views about the world itself, and not inclusive views about the world itself. Then you have a certain kind of a moral corruption that then gets to be justified by the by the term of dirty politics and so on. So it all depends on how we look at politics to be dirty and all that. And even if we take your view a little more seriously as to what dirty politics is all about, then we have to give good reasons as to why we call it dirty, and what is the alternative that we have in mind. And we have to do it again in a very public way. How should we think politically? This is one of the questions that Neha had asked. But aren't we already engaged with the world around us in a political manner? We are, by for instance, whenever we take up the whole question of, let us say, reservations or something like that. Now, it is a different thing that we can all have our different views about what reservation is all about, and can there be a better model of social justice than the model of reservations of jobs and all that. But having accepted it, we at times we try to say that I don't believe in reservations, but that particular argument is actually being political. You just are, disengaging yourself from a huge state-sponsored practice and saying that, I don't believe in reservation. Reservation के बारे में मुझे मत पूछो यार, मैं तो तंग हो गया हूँ इससे. Some people actually do say that. Now, that is a political view, and whether or not you accept it, you are already taking a certain kind of a conservative view of. The political in you is a little conservative, is a little reactionary. You don't want even to engage with the issue at all, and the choice of a non-engagement with an active hot issue doesn't diminish the political potential of the political, but actually where you say that, okay, that remains, but I don't want to engage with, but I'm more reactionary and I'm more conservative. So it all depends on what is the political that you say. Are you in sync with the times, or have you fallen behind? And are you identifying with a set of principles that you can then argue for and publicly defend? So there are a lot of things, and we are always engaged with it, but are we engaged with it in an open, critical mind is the question. I think that gives a better shape to things political and all matters that are held to be the political, right? So I think I'll come back to one of the last questions that the ways, for instance, has been asking that do people have a right to dissent and all that? Of course, we do. We do have a huge right to die. That is part of what democracy is. Even if you go by one of the traditional understandings of democracy, borrowed from Robert Dahl, for instance, democracy just doesn't organize power in a certain way. But at the heart of any democratic regime is the question that it is not just about the distribution or a power sharing arrangement that democracy talks about, or how does it get to be, prescribe a certain mode of decision making through a majority decision making and all that. But power and its contestation lies at the heart of democracy. So there will be a certain kind of a legitimate power, but there has to be a contestation without which that power becomes illegitimate. So dissent is very central to any kind of a democratic experience because there is a contestation. The principle of contestation to existing power, we have political parties. And political parties may be organized forms of dissent, but what stops an individual to dissent? Right? I may disagree with all the parties around, and I can still have my views, and I should be open to expressing my views, and nobody should be able to stop me, unless and until, of course, I create. I'm looking to create some problems. But basically, most of the responsible citizens are not actually creating problems. They are shut up by others because people say that आपके पास तो right to dissent है, लेकिन whatever you are saying goes against public order, morality, and all that. And once somebody has been gagged, and that is the new practice in most democracies, people increasingly, more and more people are being gagged, and especially the intellectuals are being gagged by उनके against लगा दो आप sedition के charges, तो वो automatically gag हो गए, and others will take a cue from it. अच्छा ऐसा मत करो यार, उसके साथ ऐसा हो गया तो हम क्यों करें ऐसा? So this is the gagging is an old practice in democracy, but no amount of gagging, however successful it is, can disallow somebody to have the right to dissent. So I think it is part of your freedom, the rights of a citizen, and so on. Vasudha, do we have more questions?
Thank you, Ashok sir. A very good afternoon.
We do. Shabana,
hello,
1
Vasudha.
minute.
Yeah.
Shabana, 1 minute.
Yeah.
Yes, Professor Acharya, we do have a bunch of questions. So I wanted
Sorry, I can't hear you.
More time will you be able to spare for a handful of questions more? Am I audible to you now,
we could
sir?
not hear you. Could you repeat?
Yeah, we could not. I could not hear you.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes.
Are you all able to hear me now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry about that. My audio just acts up sometimes. So I was asking you how much time would you be able to spare?
Not audible.
Because we do have a handful of another commitment. Am I audible? The chat box.
Okay. Sorry. If you are asking me how much of time do I have in order to take up this and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Depending, maybe
yes.
I can go for, if it suits everybody, fine. Can I go for 10 more minutes and not worry about what are the kind of questions they have? So somebody please help me some questions and tell me.
Yes, sir.
And then I can, I think,
Yes.
take more than 10 minutes on this.
Okay, if I'm audible, I can collate the questions. I have collated them already, and I can present them to you
Excuse me, Vasudha.
if I am audible.
No, actually, you are
If you
not
are able
audible
to hear, if
properly.
I'm able, if you can hear me, please give me a cue.
No, you are not
Yeah,
audible
yeah,
properly.
Savita. Let me try again.
Uh,
Let me just switch off my video. Now let me know if I'm audible. Am I audible?
You are not audible. You are not audible. I think Shabana
Not
can take up the
completely.
let
question.
Shabana take more questions.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
she can do that.
Okay.
Shabana,
Hello. Good
please.
afternoon. Good
Yes.
afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And in fact, this lecture has been very illuminating. And then our students will certainly get benefit out of it. And as this will be a part of their becoming the political analyst and political theorist in future. I hope I am audible to all. And there are some open-ended questions which Vasudha talked about. Uh, okay, there is one question which is related to current scenario related to farmers' protest, that whether this farmers' protest is actually a protest against the autocratic moves of the government, or is it pressurizing the Indian government to give up its autocratic nature? Another question is uh, on on the uncertainty of future, that so many students, they are actually feeling a lot of chaos around them, particularly after this pandemic, and a lot of events are happening at the same time. So what does the future entails ahead, especially for the young people who are actually really very worried about their future? Then another question is related to the point, related to an example which you had given about the marriages, that if someone married to some other person who is from a different community or caste, then they only restrain it to their private life and not come up in public. So is it bad that if they accept that person in their life, or why to hesitate to accept that person in public domain? So there is a query, a sort of personal kind of query. Uh, Also, there is a question that is it true that one should accommodate every other person's view? And what happened even in a democratic country recently, they are talking about the state of Maharashtra. The question is not clear. That's why I'm not taking it up. Then there is another question about, uh, please give me a second. Um, Again, example of marrying a person. That why this is a private matter. Marrying someone is a private matter. And then why at all there should be public justification of it. Then we have three more questions. That multiple parts of the world, many countries, have been rocked by pro-democracy protests like Belarus, Nigeria, Thailand, Hong Kong, Pakistan, etc. And after the disappointment of the Arab Spring, does the present scenario promise a democratic wave? Also, since a considerable number of these these countries are leaderless, can political theory celebrate the fact that certain conceptions have reached the grassroots to be interpreted independently? Um, there is one more question by Srishti Vandana.
I think
Shall I take another questions in another round, Savita?
let him answer these questions, I think.
Okay. Okay, Ashok sir, over to you.
Okay, I'd say 10 minutes, but I think I have less minutes now. It all depends. So organizers can stop me anytime whenever you wish to close the session, because I also realize that you will have to catch up with lunch also. So I will be very I will try to briefly respond to some of these questions that have been, very excellent questions have been raised. And because we most of the time we think through the present problems that we face, that and some of the dilemmas that the present problems pose at times to our lives, we wish to, at times take a more reasoned understanding of it, which is why some of you have raised this question about the farmers protest. And saying that do we see that as a reaction against autocratization and all? No, no, no. I don't see farmers protest as a movement against autocratization. It is a movement to safeguard their own interests, but they are somewhere questioning the majoritarian tendency in a democracy, which assumes to itself that whatever we do, is unquestionable because we are already supported by a majority. So your job was to vote for us, and once you have voted and we are in power, you cannot raise any questions to us. I think they are somewhere. They are somewhere questioning that kind of a, as a certain kind of a superiority about a decision-making power that the government seems to have arrogated to itself. So I think that is one question. And then there is the protest itself is one ways in how the farmers are then trying to say, well, you have come up with a series of laws, but this has happened also in the past, and this is nothing new. The farmers, so though not to such an extent, but then here is a question that, did you really think about our interests, or somewhere are you trying to corporatize, you know, the agricultural sphere altogether, and then you are trying to promote it. So what is wrong with giving us a minimum support price, for instance, an MSP? So these are the kinds of questions that the farmers are raising, which I don't think have been satisfactorily answered so far. So we, like the farmers, are also waiting for appropriate responses to these questions. So the farmers are not just protesting, they're actually raising questions in a very organized, collective manner. And those questions cannot be brushed under the carpet. So, but the farmers' protest raises a new hope for our democracy, that if you think your interests are hampered, you can actually mobilize yourself to raise such questions, and this is perfectly allowed within any kind of a democratic system. One other thing that you need to take a cue out of this kind of protest is something that I had wanted to at some point of time, but couldn't, and that is, it is not all, we now have to look at, and in order to understand how democracies function, how political communities function, that we can't always presuppose that all our actions and reactions in the political world are always going to be rational as such. So some of them will subscribe, so there is a lot of emotional baggage that people have. So there is at times an anger, there is a rage, there is a humor. So all of these, so there is a plenty of emotions that goes up to make up the political world, and we have to understand some of these human emotions in order to understand the functioning of any kind of a democracy. So at times, you know I had a student once, and he was from Kashmir, and he was a very, very bright student. And he came up to me once, and he came up with a kind of a proposal where he chose to write on anger and political theory. And then I had a very good, discussion with him. I said, "Why do you want to, flip aside the entire politics and then just write about anger? Do you think that?" Then he said that, well, there is a lot to understand even about anger, and that also needs to be theorized in a way, because for far, far too long, a certain kind of a political theory has been done, keeping in view the rational pursuits of a certain kind of a moral reasoning that theorists must always engage in. And then, so the protest is also another way to understand some of these, common human emotions and how they have been mobilized, and to what extent, and what are their political implications. And, it may come off as a kind of a rash judgment, but then if the movement endures, then these emotions get translated into a kind of a viable, enduring judgment for a long, long time. right? So that is another challenge to look at these things. Well, with the question of marriage, you see, I began by saying that there is always this kind of a flip-flop, a kind of a non-correspondence between your public and your private morality. This happens in most people's lives. And but on the other hand, I think it's a little worrying. If you ask me, I would find it a little morally worrying if you ask me that I can do whatever I like. Do I have to justify myself anywhere? No. Well, for anything that we do, even in the private sphere, don't you think that you are justifying it before your own family members also? What is the view that you take about something? For instance, somebody can be speaking eloquently about feminism in the public sphere, and he comes home and says that, well, this is not my job. My wife has to do everything. And even during the pandemic, we have learned that, if we haven't learned before, at least now we have learned that, there is a little bit of that, burden sharing, that division of labor that must happen in every family, including children, for instance. So even in the private sphere, there are a series of justifications. So what I was trying to say is that those justifications become stronger if if we make them with a consistency both in the public and the private sphere. Then they are consistent, and then and so we are political theorists are not ideologues. I know that we don't have to believe in something. We have to constantly do whatever we prescribe. No, we are not that. Political theorists at times stand off from the reality, and when they theorize, and yet they cannot escape the task of justification or justifying a particular judgment, and the kinds of that mismatch that exists between the public and the private. So if you think that let us say intra-caste or believing in endogamous marriages within caste structures is something that you can justify in the public, then by all means hold on to that belief. But if you have no right to hold on to that belief, if you somewhere think that there is a publicly you say something else, and you have to go by the constitutional values, which is the constitution being the public philosophy. So you go by the constitutional values, but in private you do something else. But in the end, what happens is that you actually you have simply you have damaged another generation, your children, for instance, with your very irresponsible, unjustified views and all that. So that, I think, we also need to take care as not just as critical citizens, but also as responsible citizens, both within and outside, both in the private sphere as well as in the public sphere. So no, I'm like, there are other ways of doing it also. You can still say, maybe I don't believe in these things, and I wouldn't like to justify, but I still have a certain preference for a certain kind of a thing. I think that is something that comes under the domain of what is morally permissible for you to do. So you may find yourself morally permissible if you say that I actually cannot justify this, but I'm doing it, and with all these kinds of limitations, please allow me to exercise my freedom in a more unilluminating, unprogressive manner. And then the moment you say this, just imagine what this is going to do to your own thinking. But that still can come under the morally permissible limit. Anyway. Oh, all
Uh,
right. Okay.
Sir, could we
Yes.
take one direct question right from the student? They want to ask you directly. One
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Shabana, can you find out? There are
Yeah, there are three raised hands. Devneet had raised the hand earlier. So
Mhm.
if,
Just one person can
yeah,
ask.
just
Yes,
Devneet, you can ask it.
yes, ma'am.
And Srishti, yeah, please ask.
First of all, good afternoon, sir, and thank you for coming, sir, joining this meet, sir. Sir, my question is, uh, sir, you, as you rightly quoted Aristotle in saying, sir, the deliberative capacity associated with politics and with the population at large is intact and has increased, sir, enormously over the years. So, but we see that after the 86 amendments, sir, the voter turnout and voter participation of the youth has decreased, and voter apathy has increased in the urban middle class. Sir, although agreeing to that deliberative capacity and the desire to be involved in politics, so why do we see this electoral dilution? So is there any way to theoretically explain this, sir?
No, no. Okay. All right. Now, so I will take it along with another question that has been posed to me before, the democratic wave that is taking place in the world. So I will try to explain, both of these, your question and the earlier question together. So, well, I don't have a straight answer, but I'm glad you asked this. This is a very good question because it means that you have been following me, and then you are raising this question. If you think that we have been, more deliberative, in course of time, well, the answer to this will be in a short way that I would give through the work of Tocqueville, for instance. Tocqueville felt that democracy is about establishing equality of conditions. It's like a river that can only flow downwards, and it will never go back in the sense that we only become over a course of a period of time, more and more equal, more and more democratic, never less and less democratic. Until I pointed out that probably, and I began by saying this, that there is a little bit of a danger to democracy now. And yet, many people have believed that democracy has a kind of a self correcting mechanism within it, which it will take care of. Now, in the 80s, and most likely around the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and all that, there was a huge interest in the declining voter turnout, which is when most of the students of comparative politics were engaged with this question as to why political parties are losing significance, political salience, and they tried to corroborate this with the decline of voter turnout. So both these things were going together. So so there was the democratic theorists and practitioners and experts were trying to see a certain kind of a correlation between low voter turnout and the declining significance of political parties, and they were trying to see these two things coming together. However, but that the decline in voter turnout may have said a little bit about the political apathy of some citizens. But actually, even if you look at the Indian case, you would see that there has been ups and downs about this, and then you must have seen in 1977, there was a huge turnout of people. And again, in the recent elections, again, there was a huge turnout. So now we don't see, we see the ups and downs about the voter turnouts on the basis of how divisive a society is. The more divisive a society becomes, the more people come to actually vote. And this is something that some people are struggling to theorize, but they keep on saying that the more and more people come to vote whenever the society becomes a lot divisive about and and there are certain issues on which they are very strongly mobilized, right? So and then this mobilization takes place on the social. So we keep deliberating. So even about the question of deliberation, that sometimes is independent of the act of voting itself, right? So voting is a one-time affair, but a deliberation is a continuous affair. And that's why Rousseau had said that English people only become free once in every 5 years. That is when they go out to vote. But the challenge for many democratic theorists was to point out as to in what ways can we keep on deliberating between two different elections, or between the elections. How do we keep alive the whole act of deliberation in order to enrich our democratic participation. Uh, yeah, so do I see a democratic wave now taking place in the world around me? Well, it all depends on how do we make sense of the pandemic after it is over. But a lot of the issues will scream for a larger attention around the world, and more people will express how they have, how they have So this democratic wave, I think, after the pandemic is over, they're going to ask themselves more questions on what led to some people being silenced, and there's a lot has happened around the world in the name of lockdowns. And so our experience of our political structures will get a little better. And many of the issues will actually scream for global attention, like, for instance, the whole question of global health. So global democratic governance will be back in very serious debates and discussions after the pandemic is over. So we might see an upsurge in that in a claim, in a clamor for more participation in decision making after the pandemic is over, not less. But so whatever may have happened during the pandemic, how people have been gagged, have been shut down, and all that, this is all going to come up in a new way, but only after we have a better understanding of who has suffered what and where and how. So I look forward to this, but I will stop here. Yes, I don't want to speak anymore, and I'm sure that we have very excellent teachers who can, whatever I may have missed out on, or whatever they might wish to disagree with me on, they can educate you much better. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Ashok sir. It really has been a very enriching and a learning experience. And I can say it because I can see so many hands still raised and couple of questions written in the chat box. But because of paucity of time, we cannot take all the questions. Maybe the students can post the questions later to you in some later days. So thank you very much, sir. Savita, over to you.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking and insightful lecture. Listening to you is for us, and we look forward for more such opportunities. I also want to thank all my colleagues for their cooperation in organizing this event. I'm grateful to all the students for their active participation and enthusiasm. I'm grateful to this expert technical team who has managed to make this program smooth and free from technical glitches. Thank you. Thank you so much. The meeting is over. All of you can
Thank you, Savita.
leave and
Thank
have
you.
a lunch.
Thank you. I've also sent my email ID just in case you have some questions. You can send
Sure,
them
sir.
directly to me.
Thank
Yeah.
you, sir.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. It was a real pleasure interacting with all
Thank
of
you.
you, and with such a huge presence of students and their interest. I must thank each and every one of you here in the Jagirusan faculty and also all the students. Thank you so much. Can I leave?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Shrishti, screenshot of the questions chat box. Is it possible?
Yes, ma'am. I will save the chats.
So, all right. All right. Now you can end the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Savita.